doesn't care about you. That's why you need a medical emergency kit. It contains life-saving medications like ivermectin, Z-Pak, and antibiotics. Stock them before they block them.
I'm David Cross, and you may know me from my election integrity work, but I also own U.S. Asset Management, an investment advisory practice. I've been an advisor for nearly 30 years, and one of the questions I get asked most frequently is, do I have enough money relative to other people my age? And while that's an interesting question, it's also the wrong question. The right question is do you have enough money to sustain your lifestyle for the rest of your life? This is a question you should know the answer to. This is what we do. Check us out at us-am.com and look for our big proud American Eagle logo.
So we're going to bring on Pete Blaber. I've known Pete for some time. He's a former Delta Force commander, contributed to armedforces.press, where he's written a lot of really insightful historical knowledge on Afghanistan and Ukraine. So Pete, welcome. Thanks for coming on, my friend.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Todd. And as you mentioned, I just wrote a article on the history of what's happened in Ukraine since 2010. I actually went further back than that to the 90s, the dissolution of the Soviet Union. And a lot of it comes from guys on the ground, or all of it, guys who were there in 2013-14 when they overthrew Viktor Yanukovych, and guys who are still there today who have gone back and forth the entire time. So it's from the guys on the ground. And what I want to talk about today is what we just witnessed over the weekend. First, the debacle in the Oval Office, the bizarre behavior by Vladimir Zelensky, and then the Democratic response that occurred afterwards. And the reason I brought up my paper is because as I watched the Democratic response, I watched my paper come to life.
I know you did.
Yeah, the perpetrators of the coup were all the ones who were on mainstream media criticizing what happened as far as what the president's role, and even the attempt to get a peace deal itself. So, I'll start with.
Interrupt you there real quick. You can really see it's like visual separation. The people who want peace and who don't, and who are on the dark side, and people, as you have said rightly before on the show, what has happened to these people on the ground over there? The killing is just insane. I mean, they're ripping apart babies, women, kids, everything, thousands per day. It has to stop, right, Pete?
Yeah, it's again, a reason that so many people are in the dark is because there is zero mainstream media coverage. I'm connected not only with my buddies who send me raw videotapes, but I'm on the Telegram channel. You can get on numerous bloggers from Russia and also Ukraine, and you can watch in real time, and it's horrific. And again, I wrote that paper as a veteran. I'm talking here today as not just a citizen, but as a veteran. Someone needs to stand up for these guys who are being killed wholesale. Hundreds of days, hundreds each day. That's not hyperbolic. You can watch a lot of them die, unfortunately. They're freezing to death in despicable conditions. And if you listen to the interviews with those guys, they all want peace. Even the Ukrainians, all they say is, we'll fight, but we really hope there's peace. And that's not happening. They've got an unelected official who is making the decisions for their country. And as we just saw in the Oval Office, how disastrous that individual is for those people on the ground, the good people of Ukraine. And so, I want to start it with a metaphor for what I watched this weekend. You know how when there's a suspicious fire, the fire department arson investigators videotape all the people in the crowd watching the fire. And that's because arsonists, it's a known pattern of arsonists, they either never leave or always return to the fire so they can watch it burn. And that's what I felt like was happening this weekend. The arsonists returned to the fire to speak to the mainstream media and criticize it. And so let's go to the Oval Office. It was bizarre. I was watching it live. Hard to explain why Zelensky seemed so disrespectful, so ornery, so on edge, trying to negotiate and challenge in front of the media. But of course, there always turns out to be an explanation, and that came right away from Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut's X account, where he wrote the following: "I just finished a meeting with President Zelensky here in Washington. He confirmed that the Ukrainian people will not support a fake peace agreement where Putin gets everything he wants and there are no security arrangements for Ukraine." Chris Murphy. So what he confirmed is that these Democrats met with Zelensky before he went to the White House. So after Murphy released his tweet, or after it came to light, which is after the Oval Office meeting, the first voice of dissent was Susan Rice. She stepped forward as the mouth of these former administrations, and she stated this was a setup, and Donald Trump was saying crazy things that were outrageous, like Ukraine started the war and Russia is not the aggressor, which I found strange because that had nothing to do with the discussion in the Oval Office. Why would she bring up those two things? Well, more on that in a minute. When she finished her performance, we found out again from another source that a group of former Obama and Biden administration administrative personnel had been advising Vladimir Zelensky all along, and that included Senator Murphy, Susan Rice, Anthony Blinken, and Victoria Nuland. So what do those individuals have in common? Well, those are 4 of the 6, and I'd add Jake Sullivan and Joe Biden, the 6 arsonists who actually started this entire conflagration back in 2014. And if you read my article, you know that that's the exact moment that this disaster was set off, and it was set off by these individuals and what they thought at the time were innocuous decisions. And the theme throughout all their efforts, their decisions is threefold. It's ignorance, arrogance, and hubris. They're ignorant of the facts. They're arrogant with their own power and what they can and can't do on the world stage. And their hubris is indescribable. But it started with their first.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
I want to just challenge the fact that it's ignorance or accidental or hubris or naive. What if it was in fact an intentional color revolution financed by CIA in the USA?
It was.
Okay, so they're not. It wasn't naivety. They're lying to cover their ass and save their lives because of the treason they've committed.
That's correct, and that's what I'm getting to. So the naivete is, if you read the cables, which will be declassified, and if you just read the public relation releases by the State Department at the time, their naivete, and then listen to their interviews, their naivete was they just never thought Russia. They thought Russia was this dilapidated, has-been superpower that was all bluff, no action. They'd never come across the line. We could do whatever we wanted. Our superior technology would freak them out and cause them to take counsel of their own fears and never come across and interfere with what they were doing in Ukraine. That's what I believe. But to your point, what started unfolding is their first bad decision was, we're going to overthrow this government, and we're going to do it because he didn't take a bad EU loan. You can still read the terms of that EU loan that he turned down for a Russian loan that had by far better terms and better outcome for the Ukrainian people. So we made their first decision was let's overthrow him because he didn't take a bad EU loan, and let that sink in for a second when you consider where we're at with the war today. Their next bad decision was how to do that, how to overthrow the Viktor Yanukovych government, and that decision was we'll use these neo-Nazis from Western Ukraine that we've kind of had on CIA payroll since World War II, and we'll pay them through a George Soros NGO, and they will be the tip of the spear. They'll cause all the mischief. They'll create the threat that we need, the coercive threat that we need. Playbook right out of the first chapter of the playbook, the coercive threat we need to chase this government off. And the neo-Nazis did not disappoint. The violence, the clashes with police, the threat, couldn't have been scripted in Hollywood any better. But along with that, they used, this was really the coming out for the censorship industrial complex. They used their USAID controlled international mainstream media, as well as their control of the main media in Ukraine, to send off this propaganda that Maidan was organic and that there weren't any neo-Nazis in it. However, that came out in the especially the European media coverage. It was interviews with the neo-Nazis. You could hear what they were saying, what they believed in. And this was the first example of the law of unintended consequences kicking these individuals' butt. What they didn't realize was everyone in Ukraine was watching that media coverage, to include the 40% of Ukraine that are ethnic Russian and Jewish. And as they watched in horror as these individuals, literally frothing at the mouth. You can still watch a lot of it on YouTube and see these talking about Ukraine's for Ukrainians, purebloods only, kill the ethnic Russians. That's what they were watching as the protests went on. And of course, the neo-Nazis didn't disappoint. In early February, they overthrew the Yanukovych government. He fled. And this was the next example of the law of unintended consequences. Like bad planners, they planned everything up to the objective, but nothing after the objective. So no one knew what to do once Yanukovych fled. And in the power vacuum, the neo-Nazis took over and ran Ukraine for what turned out to be months. And in that time, they did what they had been saying they were going to do. Now released, free to do whatever they wanted, they began a civil war that instantly turned into an ethnic war. And of course, the tactic of choice in any ethnic war is ethnic cleansing. And that happened right away in Odessa. 60 some people were burned to death inside a building surrounded by neo-Nazis, and also in Mariupol.
So the connection that you're really bringing out is of the U.S. politicians supporting and enabling all this, right?
Yes. So let's go back to those four. Chris Murphy traveled with McCain in November of 2013 while the Maidan protests were going on. He spoke to the crowd of protesters, cheered them on, assured them America was behind them, while standing shoulder to shoulder with the head of the biggest neo-Nazi party at the time, who he then had dinner with that night, him, McCain, and the head of the neo-Nazi party. So the fact Chris Murphy isn't hiding any involvement he had with Ukraine right now, the fact he's the leading active senator criticizing President Trump's peace efforts is more than ironic. It's despicable. And of course, Susan Rice was the national security advisor to Obama as this went on. In that role, so people understand what a national security advisor does, she was like the battle captain. She was the one actually in touch every day with the decision making on the ground. And of course, her deputy at the time, Susan Rice's, was Anthony Blinken, who would go on to become the Secretary of State and would pass a edict that no one would talk to the Russians from 22 until Trump and his administration began talking to them. And of course, Victoria Nuland was the person on the ground making things happen. She was the architect of the color revolution. That was her specialty at the time. So to connect the dots to both your questions, first, they overthrew the government in February. The power vacuum happened. The ethnic war, ethnic cleansing happened, which then stretched for 8 years. And during those 8 years, 14,000 ethnic Russians were killed. That's a statistic backed up by the UN. And finally, in 2022, the Russians entered eastern Ukraine for the special military operation stated by Putin to come to the aid of the ethnic Russians who were being summarily killed and by the now the Ukrainian military. The war that followed from 22 till now, 2025, has been an unmitigated disaster for Ukraine. Over 600,000 dead, same amount injured. That's about 1.5 million casualties, and massive territorial gains by the Russians, who I've been following the war the whole time. The war has already been won by Russia. Again, for people who have been denied media coverage or any other, or people on the ground coverage, it's already over. But at this point, think about the arsonists. Not only did they set the fire, but the fire killed more men and civilians than any war since World War II. And they know that historians have already rendered a verdict as to what they did back in 2013 and 14. So their only hope for salvation from that verdict is that the war and the mass killings will continue, and that, again, all hope somehow Ukraine can eke out a Pyrrhic victory here so they can say, well, at least we accomplished this. At least it was worth it for that. So
Pete, how do you see this playing out? I mean, there's talk that the Europeans, the U.S. is probably going to back away. So the Europeans maybe try to get troops on the ground and keep the fire going, as you say, and maybe drag the U.S. back in. You can create Article 5 situations or whatever. I mean, what are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah. So I think
so. Just
right. I think the Europeans are bluffing. They don't even have a military that could go in and stand on the ground. The Russians will never allow it. I think the administration's doing exactly the right thing. We should ally with Russia. The New World Order. We have more in common with Russia, more shared interests. We need to cement that relationship, work positively, end this war as quickly as possible, and let these fools suffer the consequences, again, of their choices right now. And I include the Europeans on that. It's really sad what they're doing. And it's not the European people. It's like us when we were controlled by our politicians for the last 5 years.
And it's the bankers that control the politicians.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
Pete, thank you. We'll have you back. You're a wealth of information, and I do know you have people on the ground, and you get direct feeds. So due to your previous job, go ahead, Rob.
Let me show you in 1 minute, if you don't mind. Pull my screen up. I just wanted to show. Yep. Pete, I believe you probably are familiar with this, but this just proves a premeditation to do exactly everything that you just explained to the world. What I mean by premeditation is this Smith-Mundt Modernization Act of 2012 authorized and made it legal for propaganda in America. It was signed in January of 2013. They basically gave complete and absolute immunity from prosecution to the State Department and the president of the National Broadcasting Association, to which they later changed the name to the U.S. Agency for Global Media. And on this information, the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act, it made it legal for the U.S. to use propaganda, international propaganda, inside the borders of the United States if it was for quote unquote national interest.
Wow.
So here's the way in which they are lying through their teeth, and they believe that they're immune from prosecution for lying because Obama gave them permission to do it in 2013 right before the color revolution started.
Wow.
Now it all makes sense.
Yeah. Pete,
Yeah.
thank you. I want to
Thanks.
have you back and dig into this more, but we're out of time. I've got to wrap the show up here, so I'll have you back. I really appreciate you coming on because I know you had to get up early. So thank you. Talk
Yep,
to you
no
later.
problem. All right,
All right.
guys, take care.